Much has been said of George Weah's journey from footballer to president of Africa's oldest republic, Liberia. However, even his start in life in Monrovia is a story in itself, from a poor background onto superstardom playing on some of the world's most famous football pitches. So how did he do it, and how's he doing? Well, the Liberian journalist and author Rodney Sieh has just released an unofficial biography on the president, and he took some time out of his international book tour and joined me here at Broadcasting House in London.
So my first thing was to approach him about it. I asked him, he said he wasn't ready to tell the story. But because we had two books written by former President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, I thought it was important to tell his story before this coming elections. And I embarked on this journey about 4.5 years ago. I tried to get him to talk a few times actually, and he refused, so thus the unofficial.
This book then, and the fact that there was an refusal on his part to talk, would you, hand on heart, say that this is a defence of the man because he has had his critics, or a warts and all account of his life so far?
So I try to be as objective as possible, and as you know, you cannot tell a story without telling the whole story. I interviewed about 150 of his friends, peers, ex-friends, footballers who played with him before. I traveled to Cameroon, where he played for some time. I went to parts of Europe, talked to people. So I managed to get a lot of things about him that people may not know about him through his friends and people.
Such as?
For example, there were lots of things about his wealth. For example, people say he was a millionaire after he left the game. I found that to be untrue. The time he played football, he made maybe about $8 to $10 million. And those days, footballers didn't make that kind of money they're making today. The likes of Drogba and Yaya Toure, and they make 10 times more than what he was making those days. Also, the fact that he wasted most of his money he made, from what we gathered.
On what?
He had investments in the radio stations, investment in other things, like businesses he was doing that didn't turn out to be good.
So how then does he, or has he, dealt with corruption since becoming president? If he knows how easy it is to lose money or for money to go missing, what have you discovered in your investigations? Well,
corruption has been the most critical part of this government, and I think he hasn't handled it well. As a result, there's been the U.S. sanctioned key officials in this government. I think he's lost the political will. There's a chapter in the book about political will, and so the lack of it, I think, is the main Achilles for George Weah's presidency. I think if he had the will to really go after his officials who were corrupt, accused of corruption, in some cases he defends them. He tells people he doesn't have the proof to prosecute them, which for me is a bad sign for any president.
What advice would you give to future footballers or footballers looking for a future in politics? I'm thinking of Mr. Drogba, for example. Yeah. From what you've learned and your experience in writing this book, what would your advice be? Well,
there's a chapter in the book where one of George's closest friends, Jonathan Super, he's now a senator in Monrovia, in the Senate. George, he was one of the first people George asked to be president. I'm going to run for president, what do you think? And he said, playing football is different. He said, you're going to be in charge of a lot of people. And whatever decision you make can make or break the country. Are you ready for that? So you may be a popular footballer, but people's lives depend on the president. And it is how you define yourself. It is how you depend on your progress in life. It's how you reconcile people. Those are things that I think should define any footballer who wants to become president.
Okay, so when we talk about changing and transforming people's lives, education was one of President Weah's pledges.
Right.
He should know.
Right.
He was on the streets.
Yeah.
And you obviously would see the value of education in terms of what it's given you. How's he done on that for the country?
It's good you ask that question because in the latter stage of the book, it's a chapter called Gibraltar. That's where he's from. And I went to the place and talked to the people. And one of the things they talked about was the fact that They adore him as a footballer, but they're not happy with the presidency. I think part of the reason is that the government has not invested a lot in education. There have been lots of things that they've been doing that people are not happy about, and so I think if he can just invest in education, invest in health, and make things better for ordinary people, especially those at the bottom of the economic ladder, things will get much better. And I think he's lost that.
That was Rodney D, Sieh, the author of George Weah, the unofficial biography, the story of Africa's footballer president from Liberia, of course. Well, that is it from Focus on Africa.